The rain came hard across Cascade Pass, and Celeste Hargrove Wyndham, Seattle's most powerful billionaire, felt her limousine slow without command. Two black SUVs slid out of the gray. One sealed the front. One closed the rear. The convoy radio cut to static in the same heartbeat. "Stop the car." Her voice was the one that had moved boardrooms for 15 years. "Whatever they want, I can pay it." Callum Voss did not stop. The broke single father she had hired 3 weeks ago pulled her below the window line and cut the wheel hard left. The limousine punched through a rusted service gate onto a road no map of hers had ever shown. Where does a broke driver learn that his eyes never left the road? "Before I drove for a CEO, ma'am, I used to bring people home alive." Who was this man, really? To understand the man at the wheel, one had to go back 3 weeks to a morning in late February, when Callum Voss stood in front of the bathroom mirror, knotting a tie he had not worn since the day he buried his wife. The suit still smelled faintly of the lilies Petra had bought for the casket, because 13-year-olds did not always think to ask what flowers a mother had actually loved. He had not told her this. He had only thanked her, put the suit away, and walked through 11 months of work boots and waiting room chairs and overdue notices until the morning when the only interview slot worth showing up for required a tie. The Wyndham Meridian Tower stood 40 stories above the gray of Puget Sound, its lobby colder than the rain outside. Callum signed in under a security camera that scanned his face twice, once on arrival, once after a delay long enough to suggest the system had questions. He sat with his hands folded around his daughter's school photo in his wallet pocket, the way a man holds a coin he is not yet willing to spend. The interview was not really an interview. It was a practical test. A black armored limousine waited in the underground garage. 2 evaluators stood by the rear door with clipboards. A third man, heavier gray at the temples, the kind of quiet that came from 20 years of standing 2 paces behind people who mattered, leaned against the concrete pillar with his arms crossed. That was Sterling Vance, director of security, though no one introduced him. The other 3 drivers had walked straight to the driver's door, opened it, started the engine and waited for instructions. Callum did not. He walked the long way around the car. He crouched at the front passenger fender and ran a hand along the underside of the bumper. He checked the seams of the door for tooling marks that did not belong. He pressed a thumb against each tire in turn, and when he reached the rear right, he straightened, took a tire gauge from his coat pocket and confirmed what his thumb already knew. "This vehicle does not move," he said, "until that tire is brought to spec. It is 17 psi below the safe threshold for an armored chassis at highway speed." One of the evaluators wrote something down and tried not to look impressed. The other walked to a wall phone and called the service bay. Sterling Vance did not write anything. He only watched. 11 minutes later, the tire was fixed. 40 minutes after that, Callum Voss had a job. Celeste Hargrove Wyndham did not interview drivers. She interviewed the men her security chief flagged. She read his folder in her office on the 38th floor, with the rain breaking against the window in long diagonal sheets. The folder was thin in the places folders should have been thick. Years of military service were listed only as classified. References had been redacted by a hand that did not belong to her HR department. And at the bottom of the page in Sterling Vance's neat blue ink were the only words she needed. He checked the tire. None of the others did. She had built Wyndham Meridian into the largest privately held logistics conglomerate on the West Coast by reading people the way other women read financial statements. Most of her drivers over the years had been ex-police, ex-military, ex-something. None of them had ever refused to move the car. She told Sterling to hire him. The first week Callum drove and said very little. He learned the routes. He learned which intersections in Seattle had cameras she did not trust, and which ones she did. He learned that she liked the rear right seat, that she took her coffee black until 10, and with 1 sugar after, and that she conducted half her phone calls in a voice so level it could have been used to dictate weather. What he did not say, what he wrote into a small notebook in his apartment at night after Petra had gone to bed and the dishes were drying on the rack, was everything that did not add up. The vehicle logs in the dispatch system did not match the keycard records from the garage. Schedule details that should have been need to know were circulated to 9 people on a standing email thread. The convoy formation changed twice on a Tuesday morning without anyone telling the principal in the back seat. None of it on its own was a fire. Together, it was kindling stacked against a wall. He told no one. Not yet. The second week, on a Thursday afternoon, Celeste asked him to take her to a parking structure on Yesler that her own assistant did not know she was visiting. He drove her there in an unmarked sedan. She left him in the car. Through the rearview mirror, he watched her walk 3 rows over to where a man in a charcoal jacket stood by the open trunk of a Camry. The man was perhaps 40, narrow in the shoulders, the kind of face that disappeared in a hallway. He handed her a manila envelope thin enough to hold no more than a dozen pages. She slid it into her bag without opening it. She did not introduce him. She did not say his name on the drive back. She only looked out the window at the rain and said after several blocks, "Some conversations are better when no one is supposed to know they happened." "Yes, ma'am." He filed the man's face in the same notebook with the keycard records. He did not yet have a name to put under it. He would learn it later. For now, he wrote only charcoal jacket, gray Camry plate, partial DVK, met just past 3 in the afternoon envelope, thin enough for ledger pages. The gray sedan first appeared on a Monday. He noticed it on the off-ramp coming back from a luncheon in Bellevue, a mid-size 4-door dust on the wheel wells 2 car lengths back. He took an unscheduled detour through a residential block. The sedan stayed with him through 2 turns and then peeled off. The second time was on Wednesday, on a route he had chosen that morning, without telling dispatch. The sedan was there again, 3 cars back, the same dust pattern on the wheel wells, the same driver in a baseball cap, pulled too low for a man who had nothing to hide. The third time was on Friday, on a route he had chosen in the elevator 40 seconds before climbing into the car. The sedan was already at the second intersection, already waiting. That meant the sedan was not following him. The sedan was being told where he would be. That night after Petra was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with the notebook and a cup of coffee gone cold and wrote a formal report. Time stamps, plate fragments, photographs taken with his personal phone through the side mirror. He uploaded it into the internal incident system, addressed to the director of security. The system routed it, as all driver reports were routed through the desk of Sterling Vance's deputy first. Decker Pruitt was the kind of man who looked exactly like what he was paid to look like, which was a former patrol sergeant who had washed out of a federal agency under circumstances no one quite remembered. He wore his hair short, his shirts pressed, and his smile somewhere on the lower half of his face, but never quite in his eyes. He read Callum's report on Saturday morning. He flagged it as routine surveillance/likely civilian misidentification and trimmed the photographs out of the attachment before the file moved up the chain. By the time it reached Sterling Vance's summary, on Monday, the gray sedan was a single-line item in a batch of 6 low-priority observations from a new driver still learning the city. Sterling, who was a careful man, but not an omniscient one, signed the summary and moved on. Callum noticed the response before he noticed the silence. A new driver who had flagged a credible surveillance pattern should have received a follow-up within 48 hours. He received none. The standard procedure was to switch principals to a different vehicle while the threat assessment was confirmed. There was no switch. The third procedural marker, a review meeting with the director, never appeared on his calendar. That was 3 procedural failures in a row. 1 was sloppiness. 2 was a busy week. 3 was a hand on the dial. He sat in the underground garage on Tuesday afternoon, the engine off the rain drumming on the metal above, and thought about his daughter. Petra had eaten cereal that morning, standing up at the counter because the kitchen chair still had a stack of unopened envelopes from the hospital on the seat. He had told her he would clear it tonight. He had been telling her that for 6 weeks. He could keep his head down. He could let the gray sedan be someone else's problem. He could collect a paycheck for another 3 months, pay off the second-to-last bill in the stack, and tell himself the system would handle what the system was paid to handle. Or he could go around Sterling Vance around the deputy he did not yet have a name for and put the report directly into the hands of the woman in the back seat. There was no version of that choice that did not put him on a list. He thought about the woman in the back seat, too, about the way she had looked out the window in the rain after the parking structure and said some conversations are better when no one is supposed to know they happened. She had not said it the way a billionaire said something to her driver. She had said it the way one careful person says it to another. He picked up the phone in the car and asked her assistant for 10 minutes. She gave him 15. He laid the notebook on the desk between them. He walked her through the gray sedan on 3 routes, the third route chosen 40 seconds before departure. He walked her through the keycard log discrepancies and the email thread of 9. He did not yet mention the parking structure on Yesler, because that conversation was hers, not his. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she did not reach for the phone. She did not call Sterling. She did not call her assistant. She turned a page of the notebook backward and read the line he had written about procedural failures. Then she closed the notebook and set her palm on top of it. "Mr. Voss." Her voice was the same one that had moved boardrooms for 15 years, but quieter now. "What do you need to confirm that theory?" He looked at her for a moment, the way a man looks at an open door he has been pretending not to see. "A flashlight," he said. And 10 minutes alone with the limousine. He got the flashlight that night. She gave him keys to the executive garage and instructions that did not appear on any logbook. At 9:10, with the building empty above him and the rain reduced to a hush against the concrete vents, Callum lay on a creeper beneath the rear axle of the armored limousine, with the cone of light moving slowly across the underside of the chassis. He found it on the second pass. It was the size of a deck of cards, magnetic, wrapped in a waterproof housing the color of motor oil. The adhesive backing the magnet was still soft enough to peel with a fingernail, which meant it had been set within the last 72 hours. The antenna nub at one end was active. The diode at the other end was blinking once every 6 seconds in perfect rhythm, with a legitimate fleet transponder 7 feet ahead of it. That was not a thief's device. That was a professional's device, designed to ride alongside the official signal and disappear into it. He left it where it was. A tracker removed was a tracker that told its owner it had been found. A tracker documented, photographed, and left in place was a leash, and he intended to hold the other end of the leash for as long as he could. He logged the find that night in a separate file Celeste had set up under a personal email he did not yet fully understand. The metadata of the photograph went with it. He did not file anything through the company system. He drove home at 11. Petra was asleep at the kitchen table with her chemistry textbook open and a yellow pencil still tucked between her fingers. He carried her to bed, the way he had carried her to bed when she was 4, and stood in the doorway afterward, longer than a man with nothing to fear would have stood. The cabin camera went dark the next night. He saw the gap when he came back to the limousine after a late drop-off downtown. The status indicator on the dashboard, which should have shown a steady green for the interior feed, blinked once and then resumed normal. He pulled the log. There was a window of 12 minutes earlier in the evening from 9:14 to 9:26 when the cabin camera had recorded only black. No incident ticket had been filed. No technical alert had been logged. The blackout simply existed, like a missing page someone had torn cleanly out of a book. He cross-referenced access. Only 3 people in the building had remote override authority over the cabin camera array: Sterling Vance, the head of Fleet IT, and Decker Pruitt. The head of Fleet IT had been at a daughter's recital in Bellevue from 7 to 10. Sterling had been on a charity board call that ran from 8:45 until well after the blackout. That left one name on the page, and Callum did not write it down for a long moment because there is a kind of certainty that does not need ink to keep its shape. 12 minutes was a window, long enough to install something the tracker could not do on its own: a microphone, a backup beacon, a piece of hardware that would survive even if the magnetic device under the axle were ever found. Long enough also to copy whatever sat on the briefing tablet Celeste left in the rear pocket on Tuesday nights. Callum did not yet know which. He needed only the fact that 12 minutes had been used. He photographed the screen. He copied the log to the same private file as the tracker. Then his phone rang. The number was a string of zeros. He let it ring twice before he answered. The voice on the other end had been put through a modulator that gave it the flat, papery quality of a man speaking through a paper towel tube. It was patient. It was unhurried. It said exactly 21 words, and then it was gone. On Friday, drive the assigned route. Do not deviate. Do not report this call, or your daughter learns something has happened. He stood in the garage for 13 seconds after the line went dead. Then he took the SIM card out of his company phone, broke it in half, and on the burner he had carried since his first week on the job, he dialed the only number he still remembered from the years he could not talk about. Marcus answered on the third ring. They had not spoken in 2 years. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. Most of it was logistics. None of it was sentimental. By the time Callum walked back into his apartment, a man named Marcus, working out of a small private security firm in Spokane, had already arranged a chartered car, a route through 3 counties that bypassed the interstate cameras for the first 2 hours, and a temporary residence at Petra's grandmother's house outside Bend. He woke Petra at 4 in the morning. She sat up in bed with her hair in her face and looked at him the way a girl looks at a father whose job she has always half understood and half refused to understand. "How long?" she asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. She did not ask why. She got out of bed and packed a duffel bag from a list she had apparently kept in her head for a long time, which was a thing he had not known about his own daughter until that morning. At 5:15, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver was a woman in her 40s, with the calm posture of someone who had carried heavier loads than a teenager and a duffel bag. Petra hugged her father at the door of the car and said quietly, "Be careful with the lady you drive." "I will." She held on 3 seconds longer than she usually did. Then she got into the car and did not look back. He stood on the curb until the taillights were gone. Then he walked back inside, made coffee, and started memorizing the topographic survey maps of every county road between Seattle and the eastern slope of the Cascades. By Friday morning, he had 3 escape corridors committed to memory. One of them ran through a service road behind a drainage gate that had not been used by anyone with a key since the timber companies pulled out in the late 1980s. That was the road he would need. Friday came down hard with rain. The convoy departed the tower at 9:40 in the morning. 3 vehicles in standard formation, Celeste in the rear seat of the armored limousine, reading a briefing on her tablet. The lead car carried 2 of Sterling's day shift men. The trail car was commanded by Decker Pruitt himself, which was the first thing in 3 weeks that had felt deliberately wrong about a convoy assignment. 40 minutes out of the city, the lead vehicle indicated a route change and turned hard onto a frontage road that had not been part of the morning's brief. Callum did not follow. He keyed the radio. "Lead, confirm route deviation." "Static." He keyed the trail. "Decker, confirm trail position." Static, the same flavor of static, the kind that came from interference deliberately laid down, rather than the kind that came from terrain. Celeste looked up from her tablet for the first time in 20 miles. "Callum." "I see it, ma'am." "Lower yourself in the seat." "Now, please." He did not say it twice. The 2 black SUVs came up from the next side road in the way the man at the bottom of the chessboard comes up one, a beat faster than the other, sealing the front. The trailer closing the rear, both moving with the deliberateness of a pattern that had been studied on paper before it had ever moved on a road. "Stop the car," Celeste said. Her voice was the one that had moved boardrooms for 15 years. "Whatever they want, I can pay it." He did not stop. The decision tree in his head had collapsed to a single branch the moment the radio went to static. 2 SUVs in clean tactical formation, a rear vehicle under deliberate silence, a lead car following someone else's plan, and a principal in the back seat who still believed in the older world where this could be paid for. None of the men in those SUVs were here to be paid. He laid his right hand on Celeste's shoulder and pressed her below the window line. In the same motion, his left hand cut the wheel hard. The limousine answered the way an animal answers a leash it has been waiting to break. The frame torqued. The undercarriage scraped. The rusted service gate, which had been chained shut for 30 years and which a county clerk had long since forgotten existed, took the bumper at 41 miles an hour and screamed open in a single shriek of metal that sounded like an entire decade splitting. The road on the other side was 3 feet narrower than the limousine. Branches raked the paint off both flanks. Behind them, the gate slammed shut on its own torsion, and the foliage closed over the gap, as if a hand they could not see had drawn a curtain across the world. He drove for 9 minutes without speaking. He did not slow down until the 3rd bend. When the engine finally idled, the only sound in the cabin was the rain on the roof and the breath of a woman who had not until this morning been afraid in 20 years. Where are we? On a road that does not exist on the map your security team carries. You memorized this 3 days ago. His eyes found hers in the rearview mirror. She held them for a beat, and what was in her face was not gratitude. It was the cold working calculation of a woman who had just understood in a single intake of breath that the man who had asked for a flashlight had not been guessing about anything. The question was no longer who was watching her. The question was who had been working for how long and to what hour to put her exactly here on a road no one would think to look for her on for exactly long enough to start a clock she did not yet know was running. The ranger station had not been staffed since the previous summer. He pried the door with a tire iron and got them inside before the gray of the afternoon turned to true dusk. There was a wood stove, a phone with no dial tone, a wall map of the district under glass, and a propane lantern that still had fuel in it. Before he unzipped his coat, he walked back to the limousine, slid under the rear axle one more time, and pulled the tracker free of its housing. He carried it into the station and dropped it into the cold iron belly of the wood stove. Cast iron 3/8 of an inch thick would mute the broadcast better than anything else in the building. Until the stove door opened again, the receivers monitoring the signal would see it stop at the timber gate. He swept the room twice for cameras before he let her take off her coat. Then he asked for her phone. She handed it over. He opened the developer console the way a man opens a wound to see how deep it goes. There was a process running in the background that should not have been there, and when he expanded it, the digital signature on the installer was authenticated by a certificate belonging to the internal security team of Wyndham Meridian itself. The install timestamp was 3 weeks old. 3 weeks meant the week he had been hired, not because Decker had known he was coming. Callum understood after a moment of arithmetic, but because Decker had been refreshing the surveillance every time the company refreshed its handsets, and Callum's first week had simply fallen on the same quarterly cycle. He turned the screen so she could see it. "Someone in your own security division put surveillance on your phone the same week I started." She looked at it the way she looked at financial statements that did not add up. Then she sat down on the wooden bench beside the stove, folded her hands once in her lap, and told him what she had been carrying for the last 60 days. "My uncle," she said. "Brixton Hargrove. He has been quietly collecting proxy votes for a divestiture of our Meridian Routing System subsidiary." "To whom?" "To a buyer entity registered in Singapore, registered in Wyoming, through a Cayman holding, and ultimately controlled when one is permitted to look by him." "At what price?" 40% below internal valuation. She let that sit on the wood between them for a moment. "There is a clause in our corporate charter. from the year my grandfather wrote it. If the chief executive is unreachable for a continuous 48 hours, the board may convene under emergency procedure and ratify pending resolutions without her signature. He has the votes. He has lacked only the 48 hours. Callum did the arithmetic in his head slowly, the way a sniper does the arithmetic on a wind that has just shifted. And the moment the convoy ambush hit, he said, "Your 48 hours started." Yes. The phone in his coat, the burner, not the company phone, the one Marcus had refreshed with a clean SIM by courier that morning, vibrated against his chest. The caller ID showed 3 letters and nothing else. SV. Sterling Vance was on the line, and his voice had the strain of a man who had spent the last 3 hours discovering that his own department had been built around him like a fence around a sleeping dog. "Callum, listen carefully. I have not seen one of your reports intact. Not the sedan. Not the keycard logs. Not any of it. Decker has been filtering everything from the start. I'm only now reading the originals because I forced a manual pull from the archive at 4 this afternoon. He overrode the cabin camera Wednesday night. I know that now. Sterling, do you have anyone you can trust on the city side? No, not the city. Decker knows people on the city watch desk. If you walk into a Seattle precinct with Mrs. Wyndham, you'll be in a holding room within 20 minutes and on the wrong side of a press release within an hour. Go county. Go north. There's a sheriff named Walt Greer who runs an independent comm system out of his hat office. He owes me from a long time ago. He'll take the call." The line cut. Celeste looked up from the bench. "Owen." The single word came out of her like a piece of evidence she had been holding in her mouth for too long. "Ma'am?" "The man in the parking structure on Yesler. His name is Owen Kelsey. He has been my internal audit lead for 7 years. He was sending me the anomalous routing entries on Meridian 3 months before I knew what shape they made. We need to reach him. He has the documentation that ties the shell entities back to Brixton's signature." Callum nodded once. The shape of the thing was finally on the table. Tracker. Phone software. Filtered reports. Cabin camera blackout. A convoy laid out for an ambush by someone with timing and inside access. 48 hours of forced silence to swing a corporate vote. And a single internal auditor with the documents that could pull the load-bearing wall out from under all of it. He looked at Celeste across the lantern. "Then we are not running from anyone, ma'am. We are running towards someone." "Yes." He did not know, sitting in the ranger station at 6 minutes past 9 that night, that the story had already begun to be written without him. At 3:42 in the morning, Eastern Time, a press desk at a financial wire service in New York opened an embargoed file and pushed it live. 2 minutes later, 2 other wires ran the same file from independent press releases. The text of all 3 was nearly identical, which was the first thing anyone reading them carefully would have noticed, except no one would read them carefully for several hours yet. The story was that Celeste Hargrove Wyndham, chief executive of Wyndham Meridian, had been driven off her scheduled route the previous afternoon by a new driver whose military service record was sealed. The driver had isolated her from her professional security detail under circumstances the company was now investigating. Wyndham Meridian was unable to confirm her present location. A document had been recovered from the abandoned limousine indicating a $1 million private settlement payment to one Callum Voss executed and dated the morning of the incident. Brixton Hargrove issued a statement of deep concern through his counsel at 4:11. The statement called for the board to convene immediately under emergency procedure to ensure continuity of leadership during a moment of grave personal duress. By 5:30 in the morning, Decker Pruitt had filed an official report through the company's external counsel, describing the incident as an active kidnapping in progress and naming Callum Voss as the principal suspect. The board meeting, originally scheduled for Sunday afternoon, was moved up by 12 hours. The notice went out in the same window of minutes as the wire stories, which a careful reader later would also notice. Callum learned all of this at 6:15 the next morning, when Sterling came back on the line with his voice gone tighter than the night before. They've gone public. 3 wires. Same story. Settlement document. Sealed record. Active kidnapping framing. The board meeting is being moved up 12 hours. They're going to call it before you can get her back in front of them. Celeste did not flinch when Callum told her. She only walked to the window of the ranger station, looked out at the pale rim of dawn breaking over the timber, and said one sentence very quietly. They are not trying to take the company from me. They are trying to take me from me first. He understood. The 48 hours had stopped being the deadline. The deadline now was whatever hour the board was permitted to vote. The 48 hours had been the floor. The narrative was the ceiling. Between those two surfaces, 2 people were going to have to walk all the way back into a room that had already been told they were not coming. Then his phone vibrated again. A different number. A short message. Owen Kelsey. Encrypted channel. He has documents. Says he's being followed at home. Needs a safe room to give a statement on record. Callum showed Celeste the screen. She read it twice. The second time, the cold returned to her face, in the way Callum had begun to recognize, not anger, not fear, but the look of a woman who had just been handed the last brick she needed to finish a wall. "Get the keys," she said. "We are going to a sheriff's office." The county line ran through a stretch of road that smelled like wet cedar. Before leaving the ranger station, Callum had opened the cold stove, pulled the tracker from its cast-iron silence, and reattached it to the rear axle. The men with the receivers were going to follow them to the next address. He intended for them to. He took the road at speed limit. A man drawing attention through the wrong county at the wrong hour was a man 1 phone call from a press release. He drove with the kind of stillness in his chest that he had not felt since the years he did not talk about. Walt Greer's department occupied a low brick building outside a town of fewer than 2,000 people. The sheriff himself came out before they were halfway up the gravel apron, a tall man in his 60s, with hair the color of an old quarter and the posture of someone who had been standing in doorways most of his life. He did not look at Celeste first. He looked at the limousine. "You picked the right gate, son. That one used to be ours back when we still patrolled the timber roads. I appreciated the hinges," Callum said. Walt waved them inside, locked the front door, killed the public scanner, and walked them through to a back room with 1 window, 1 telephone, and a steel cabinet that had not been opened in a decade. "Sterling vouched for you. That's good enough for the next 8 hours. After that, you'll have to vouch for yourselves." Celeste set her phone the tracker and a small bound folder of printouts on the table. "I need 3 things, Sheriff. An attorney on a secure line. A man named Owen Kelsey brought into this building under any pretense your office can sustain. And a camera with a clean chain of custody." Walt looked at her the way men of a certain age looked at women they had decided in the first 30 seconds to take seriously. "Ma'am," he said, "you can have all 3 within the hour. Margot Ashby joined the secure line from a conference room in downtown Seattle at 20 minutes past noon. Her face came up on the small monitor. Short gray hair, no makeup, the kind of reading glasses that meant she had been on call since 5 in the morning. 11 years as Celeste's outside counsel, a voice like a closing argument, the patience of a woman who had once worked through a Christmas Eve to break a fraudulent escrow. She listened without interrupting, and when Callum had finished walking through the tracker, the cabin camera, the phone certificate, the filtered reports, and the timestamps that lined up too neatly with Brixton's motion, she asked one question. "Where is the buyer entity registered?" Celeste told her. "Give me 4 hours." She took 3. At 2:47 in the afternoon, she came back with the chain laid out the way a surgeon lays out instruments. Singapore was wholly owned by a Cayman shell. The Cayman shell was wholly owned by a Wyoming LLC. The Wyoming LLC had a single member of record, masked behind a registered agent service. But Margot had a friend at the agent's compliance desk, and off the record, that friend had named the natural person who signed the original beneficial ownership disclosure. The name was Brixton Hargrove. That alone would have been enough. Margot had not stopped at enough. She had pulled the wire history on the Wyoming LLC because every shell company paid for something, and every payment left a number. 6 months earlier, the LLC had wired $340,000 to a debt relief firm in Reno, Nevada, into a settlement account opened in the name of one Decker Pruitt, retiring a gambling debt to a card room in Las Vegas that did not ordinarily forgive its losses. Celeste listened with her eyes closed and her hand flat on the table. "He didn't believe in anything," she said quietly. "He was bought." "For a number that would not have changed your monthly fuel budget," Margot answered. "Yes." Owen Kelsey arrived at 4:15 in a deputy's unmarked truck under the cover story of a witness to a logging dispute in the next county. He came in by the side door, a leather satchel under his arm that had not left his lap in 5 hours. He was quieter than Callum remembered from the parking structure on Yesler, and more frightened. The charcoal jacket was the same. The narrow shoulders were the same. The face that disappeared in a hallway was Callum understood. Now the face of a man who had spent 7 years making himself small enough not to be noticed by the very people he was watching. He set the satchel down. He laid out the documents one at a time. He spoke into the camera with his right hand on a printed Bible the sheriff had retrieved from a desk drawer that did not on the surface appear to contain Bibles. He said his name, his title, the dates, the routing entries, the names of the 3 vice presidents whose signatures had been forged at the bottom of the original divestiture memo. He said how he had first noticed the anomaly 14 months earlier, and how he had taken 12 months to be certain enough to put a single sheet of paper into a woman's hand in a parking structure on a Thursday afternoon. He spoke for 37 minutes. When he stopped, his hand on the Bible had gone very white. Celeste reached across the table and put her hand on his wrist. "You did the right thing for 7 years, Owen. I'm sorry it took until now for the room to be safe enough for you to say it." "It was never going to be safe, ma'am. You just made it loud enough." The SUV arrived at 5:06 in the evening. Callum saw it first on the closed circuit feed. A single black vehicle, no county plates, 2 men in the front seat, no markings, no urgency. The kind of approach that meant the driver had reached the address by following a signal, not by reading a map. The tracker. The men had followed it from the timber gate, where it had been silent for 15 hours, to a sheriff's department, where it had gone live again at noon. By coming, they had given a piece of evidence about their own behavior they did not yet realize they had given. Callum did not arm himself. He did not go out the front door. He did the one thing the men in the SUV had not been trained for, because their training had been built for soft targets in hotel garages and shoulders in elevators. He lowered the hydraulic gate at the end of the gravel apron behind them. He flipped the perimeter lights to full white. He clipped on the body camera Walt had handed him the chain of custody seal still around its housing, and walked onto the porch with his hands in plain view. The men in the SUV did not get out. The lights, the gate, and the camera together did the work that had been done in older centuries by a sheriff stepping into the street. After 90 seconds, the SUV reversed back down the apron. The camera recorded a license plate, a tinted window failure on the rear left quarter, and a 13-second image of the driver's face when the man had glanced once toward the porch in the belief that he was unobserved. Callum walked back inside, unclipped the camera, handed it to Walt, and said, "Booking number, please." The threat had walked up to the door of a sheriff's department and identified itself on camera. That too would go on a wire, but not the wire Brixton had been counting on. Celeste recorded her statement at 6:40 in the evening, with the steel cabinet behind her and the propane warm light of a desk lamp on her face. She did not perform. She did not raise her voice. She held up each object in turn, the tracker, the phone with the developer console open to the offending process. A printed copy of Margot's corporate chain, a still frame from Owen's testimony, the time-stamped log of the cabin camera blackout, and named them one by one in the same level voice she had used to dictate her schedule on every Tuesday morning of Callum's 3 weeks behind the wheel. When she was finished, she looked into the lens and said the only sentence she had written in advance. "I am Celeste Hargrove Wyndham. I am the chief executive of Wyndham Meridian. I have not been kidnapped. I have not been incapacitated. I will be in the boardroom at the announced hour, and I will bring the people who put me on a mountain road with me." Margot took the file. It went by secure channel to 7 members of the board, to 2 financial wire desks, who had not 12 hours earlier run the original story, and to the general counsel of the SEC's Pacific Regional Office. The narrative was no longer being written by the men who had bought it. The boardroom was on the 38th floor. Callum drove her in at 12 minutes past 9 the next morning. The rain had stopped sometime in the night. The light over Puget Sound was the gray, hard light of a Sunday that had decided to be honest. He proposed the service entrance through the loading dock. She refused. "If I come in through the back," she said, "I confirm the story they have been telling. I am going through the front." Sterling Vance was waiting in the lobby. He had not slept. His coat still carried the burned coffee of the precinct, where he had spent the night authenticating Decker's wire records line by line. He did not speak. He fell into step, took the folder Margot had couriered ahead, and rode the elevator up at Celeste's shoulder. Walt Greer had sent 2 plainclothes deputies down ahead of them on the night train. They were in the lobby, already in suits that did not quite match, holding paper coffee cups, the way men hold paper coffee cups, when they would prefer to be holding something heavier. Decker Pruitt entered the lobby at 9:14 on his own by the elevator that came up from the parking garage. He was walking toward the front desk to issue a final instruction to the security duty officer. He did not get there. The 2 deputies took him by both elbows and walked him into a side conference suite without ever raising their voices. He was advised of the warrant Margot had cut at 4 in the morning. He was permitted to call his lawyer. He did not call his wife. Celeste did not see any of that. She rode the elevator up while it was happening. Brixton Hargrove's 70-years-old Navy suit, cut a year too tight. The careful tan of a man who played golf in 3 states was 9 minutes into a 40-minute presentation when the doors of the boardroom opened. The presentation had been paced, a careful observer would have noted later, to bring the formal motion to the floor at exactly the minute the 48-hour clock would expire. He was on his 3rd slide, titled Continuity of Executive Function. He was reading the 3rd bullet aloud. The chief executive's judgment under conditions of sustained physical duress must be considered presumptively impaired when the elevator chime sounded and the room turned in a single motion. Celeste walked to her seat at the head of the table. She set the folder down. She did not sit. "Continue, Uncle Brixton. I want the rest of the slide on the record." The room did not laugh. The room did not even breathe. Brixton recovered the way men of his generation recovered, by reaching for procedure. "Celeste, thank God. We have all been worried. You need medical evaluation before we proceed." She set the tracker in its waterproof housing in the middle of the table. "This was attached to the rear axle of my limousine the morning I hired Mr. Voss. The adhesive was set 3 days before that. I have photographs of the install date, the device signature, and the receiving frequency which matches the receiver registered to a private security contractor your office retained on a discretionary line item in November." "Anyone could have." She nodded once at the corner of the room. The technician at the wall panel cued the recording. Owen Kelsey's face filled the screen at the end of the table. Owen Kelsey's voice walked the room through 14 months of routing data, 3 forged signatures, and 1 wire transfer to a debt relief firm in Reno, Nevada. "A disgruntled," Brixton began. She set the next page on the table. Margot's corporate chain, 4 jurisdictions, 1 beneficial owner disclosure, 1 name. Brixton's lawyer at the far end of the table started to stand. "I would like to raise a point of procedure regarding the admissibility of—" "Decker Pruitt was detained in the lobby 35 minutes ago," Celeste said. "He is currently with the King County Sheriff's deputies in the side conference suite. The settlement payment that retired his gambling debt last spring was funded out of the same Wyoming LLC that funded your offshore buyer, Uncle Brixton. The wire transfer reference number is on the third page of the folder in front of you. Sterling Vance stepped forward from the back wall and confirmed the security documents one by one as Celeste named them. Margot's voice came up on speaker and confirmed the legal chain. The general counsel of the SEC's Pacific Regional Office had been on a call for the previous 40 minutes that was technically an informational conversation. Brixton sat down somewhere in the middle of all of that. It was not a deliberate sitting. His legs had stopped doing the work. The board voted to suspend him from his seat, freeze the Meridian Routing Systems transaction, pending forensic audit, and authorize an independent governance review covering every line item Decker Pruitt had touched in the previous 18 months. The vote was unanimous, including the proxies Brixton had spent 2 years collecting, because the people who had handed him those proxies had been in the room when Owen Kelsey's voice came out of the speaker, and there were certain things even a proxy could not survive being seen near. Celeste sat down after the vote. She looked at Callum standing by the door where he was supposed to stand, and what was in her face was not in any visible way what a CEO gave a driver. It was the look one careful person gives another when both have just walked all the way back into a room that had told them they were not coming. 6 months passed, the way 6 months always passed, in a company learning for the first time in 2 generations to be transparent. Brixton was indicted on 2 counts of securities fraud and 1 of conspiracy. Decker accepted a plea agreement that cost him sworn cooperation and a state law enforcement pension he had been 13 months from vesting. Wyndham Meridian's voluntary governance disclosure became within a quarter the template 3 other West Coast logistics firms cited in their own filings. Celeste offered Callum the position of Director of Personal Security with a salary that would have settled the last of the hospital bills inside 90 days. He turned it down. He sat in her office on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with the rain returning the way it always did in Seattle, and he told her why. "I left the Navy SEALs 8 years ago," he said. "I did not leave because I was no longer capable. I left because I had run out of the kind of will that lets a man live inside a state of permanent readiness. My wife had her first diagnosis on a Tuesday in March. I was on a hilltop in a country I cannot name, and I was not there. She had her second diagnosis on a Wednesday in October. I was 3 time zones away on a contract I had told her was the last one. The cost of those 2 absences is not a debt I can pay off with overtime. It is a debt I have to stop adding to." Celeste listened the way she had listened in the ranger station. "What can I give you that would not be that?" she asked. He told her. He signed a part-time consulting contract that let him set his own schedule decline any week without explanation and refuse any assignment that required a phone he could not turn off. His one-man firm registered its first independent contract that month. Petra came back from Bend 2 weeks later. She brought him a wooden sign for his office pine she had cut in shop class with the company name burned into it. She told him she was proud of him, told him he was not allowed to make her cry in his office, then ran for the airport because the school van was leaving for a debate tournament in 40 minutes. He held the sign with both hands for a long time after she was gone. The Friday in April was the kind of Friday that arrived without permission. Celeste called him at 1 in the afternoon on his consulting line. She did not distribute a route to her security detail. She did not have her assistant set up a car. She gave him an address on the east side of Lake Washington, a time and nothing else. He arrived at 3 in the old sedan he had rebuilt that winter in the garage corner, where he had taught himself the kind of bodywork his wife had once teased him for being too proud to pay someone else for. The car had been hers. He had twice come close to selling it. He had not been able to either time. Celeste came down the front walk in a coat the color of slate. She stopped at the curb and looked at the sedan. "Can a woman in my position ride in this car?" she asked, "and still be considered safe?" "Safety, ma'am," he said, "has never come from the price of the car." She walked to the front passenger door. She did not walk to the back. She opened the door, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap, the way she had folded them on the wooden bench in the ranger station 6 months and 2 lifetimes earlier. "My clients usually prefer the back seat," he said. "This isn't a client arrangement." He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then he started the engine. They drove north along the lake and then west toward the Sound slower than the road required, and the late light of an April afternoon came down over the water of Puget Sound, the way it had come down over working harbors and quiet rooms for as long as anyone in that city could remember. He had spent a long career learning to bring other people home alive. He was learning finally the harder thing, which was to stay, when the danger was over, in the place where he had brought them.